All right, everyone. Welcome back from that keynote activity. I hope you all had a great time exploring learning engineering to a little bit of a greater degree and applying it to some organizational challenges. So we're going to get kicked off here in the afternoon, and we're going to start that by inviting Megan Torrance to jump back in here for a minute and for her to take a look around your Miros and just kind of provide a little bit of recap and feedback and thoughts based on what you see in there. So Top Gun ace Megan Torrance, you want to take it away?
I sure do. Thank you, sir. This was super cool. I got to float across the Miro boards, and I'm going to encourage you all to check out the Miro boards yourselves and after the session today, because these will be available after the session, and just see what other teams came up with, see what the other challenges were and the other cards, and enjoy that a little bit. So I'm going to dig in on a couple of things that really jumped out to me on each of these, and note that this is actually, I did not actually have the benefit of having chatted with you all or listened to the conversation, but so there's some things that you left on the boards that were, I think, worth looking up. I like the idea, right? These tools help us accelerate speed to design. When we have a common language, when we have a common tool set, we can deploy them together like a well-honed tool or well-honed team. And so I think that was really kind of a cool thought, especially if those models are consistent and familiar to everybody. I love that this particular team kept their conversation at the high level. How do we tackle this rather than what is the solution? I don't know about you. I like to fix things. Humans are driven to create and improve the world around them, right? And so I want a solution, and but I need that process and that rigor of stepping back and doing that on a little bit more formal basis. So love the idea that we can use these techniques to help us onboard very quickly to a topic we know nothing about, that may not be very concrete, because like that never happens in the real world, where some executive calls you in and says, hey, I want you to do a thing, and they have no specificity. This team, shout out here. I'm loving that there's a pilot program before a full rollout, but also I'm going to move my big love here. Being change champions, or leveraging your change champions to become your consultants, and to really, I think one of the cool things about the work that we do when we engage the business, right? We build their skills, not just the project that we're doing, but we build the skills of the people that we work with, and that sets them up for personal success as well as to multiply that success within the organization. Talked about a little bit, this group was honing in on tools that meet people where they are. I'm not sure if these were the learning engineering tools, the instructional design tools, or what this team was envisioning they would use in their process, but I kind of love that. And they noted adoption takes time, and I noted in here a link to the technology acceptance model, which is an opportunity to explore different ways in which people connect in with technologies and adopt them, and what they need to feel comfortable and confident and safe and ready to use those as a launching pad. I don't know about you. I have no idea what sneaky gamification is, y'all, but man, that sounds like fun. So whatever that is, I am all for it. I like the idea of interrogating the problem. Really digging in. There's a great Albert Einstein quote, or at least attributed to Albert Einstein: if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 59 seconds or 59 minutes defining the problem and 1 minute solving it. Right? So I thought that was pretty cool. Some love from a former UXer for the cards. They are definitely resonating there, and they should, because there's a lot of borrowing, folks. And then some soak time. Kind of like this. This team was really resonating in with that opportunity to give folks time to sit with the problem and the solution. And soak time is one of the cards. So those of you who aren't in this group, that's the soak time card. In fact, this group copied and pasted was all about, I'm pretty sure it's not just all about the bubble baths, just wrapping the entire thing, every single step along the way, they are operating in a space in which they have space for that reflection and moving on. And then finally, this group at the far left, lots of love for both use cases and negative use cases. It's super easy to start with user stories. And sometimes we forget to get the negative user stories. What don't we want to happen? This is all about human-centered learning, right? We got engineering on this, but don't forget that the learning happens inside that big squishy lump inside your head, and that we need to make sure we connect to the humanity. And shout out here, right? Because sometimes these are easy. Technical skills are easy. Sales skills, easy to measure the outcomes of those, right? Some of these things are going to be really, really easy, and some of these are going to be harder. And we may want to cut our teeth on the processes that feel easy to us, and what feels easy to you might not be easy to somebody else. We want to cut our teeth there before we tackle some of the more challenging ones. It's how we can iterate on our implementation. I'm trying to find my stop screen button. I realize I've had my sunglasses on this entire time, and that might be why I can't share it or stop it. There we go. I am going to turn it back to you, Ramsey, and the rest of this super cool afternoon.
And Megan, before you jump off, thank you so much for joining us today. And one last question for you. If you had to choose Goose, Maverick, or Iceman, which one would you choose?
Oh, man. I am all about being somebody's supportive wingman, so I'm Goose all the way.
My gut is we got a lot of gooses up on this call right now because I'm in the same boat as you. Megan, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate your time and your energy. You've definitely filled us up with inspiration, and we are flying high. So thank you.
Awesome. Hey, and for those who are doing the Aviators Challenge, you can get your own set of the the instructional design cards. And if you message me, I'll throw an email link in here. You can. We'll let you know when the learning engineering cards are available, because this was actually a pilot test of the pilot. Did you get that? A pilot test of the learning engineering cards.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. All right, everybody. If you feel so called, I'd love to see who you resonate most with from that Top Gun movie. I'm seeing some gooses coming here. Let's prove me wrong or right here. And I'm apologizing to Merlin fans. It's been a long time since I've watched the movie. So you got that one, Aaron, for sure. Well, how about that learning engineering? If I wasn't already pretending to be a pilot, I would probably start pretending to be a learning engineer, which is another job I'm not qualified for. But as we're moving it forward here, I'm hoping to start to make this transition from generating ideas, which is a lot of effort. It takes a lot of lift to generate ideas. But once you get those ideas up, gaining support and keeping them alive, keeping them in the air, and then getting them to get to their destination, to grow and to scale in an organization is an equally, if not even more difficult job to do. And one of the ways that we can do that, one of the ways that we can get buy-in is via story. Learning how to pair powerful ideas with narratives is essential for being able to create change in our organization. Story crafting and storytelling are core leadership skills. But they're more than that, they're part of what makes us human. In our next keynote experience, you're going to grow your ability to create and share stories. Kick-ass Storytelling for Humans is an interactive keynote from Frame Masters and Tim May. Frame's a speaker and storyteller who elevates stories of others through workshops, collaborations, and is the host and artistic director of the award-winning Backfence Storytelling, one of Pacific Northwest's premier live storytelling series. Frame's a researcher and developer who finds new ways to help individuals and businesses tell their stories. Her curiosity has led her around the globe as both a performer and a coach to CEOs, artists, scientists, and athletes who are all looking to better understand themselves and breathe life into the way that they communicate and lead. She's joined by creative director of EXLEARN, Tim May. You're about to witness some of Tim's visual storytelling abilities. And while he's awesome at capturing and using visual language to convey complex ideas, he is also an incredibly experienced storyteller, leading EXLEARN storytelling for change courses for 5 years, and having worked with brands like Netflix, Kaiser Permanente, Red Bull, and Nike on using story to scale change in their businesses. True collaborators, Frain and Tim have created a compelling storytelling experience for you all together. Please welcome to EXLEARN, Tim May and Frain Masters. Here you all go. Floor is yours.
Hi. Hello.
Hello, everyone.
So glad to be
Thanks
here.
so much, Ramsey. I was like taking that and running with it with the idea that, like, you know, we're giving these ideas flight and we're taking it to the moon, buddy. I am very like vain that I have a original 1980s like NASA hat. I think it's pretty cool.
I have no hat. I feel that I should have had some sort of hat for this, and I don't have hat.
Right.
Nor
Well, I know
glasses.
you have your Dolly World hat, which is like one of your signature moves. It's one of
true.
the best things ever. It's super cool. All right, so I'm going to share this window and validate that we can see the window. It looks like it's there, so that's great. And Frain, to kick off our concept here, kick-ass storytelling for humans.
Yeah.
I love telling stories and helping people understand their world. And just a couple of notes here. We already had our introduction, so I'm not sure you have anything more to say about yourself, Frain.
Not really. That was a great introduction. Thank you, Ramsey. That was great.
Yeah, Ramsey, that was fantastic. So that's us. I do wish you still had your octagonal rims that you were wearing when we took this photo. And yeah, I mean, you did have a pretty cool
That's
hat.
another story.
Right.
It's another story of those. So
We'll save that for another time. But part of what we're digging into is this concept that every time we're communicating, the thing we are communicating with is a human. That is the thing on the other end of the screen or in the room or wherever it is that we are trying to make a connection. And part of what we're going to dig into today is that humans are these complicated bags of muscle and tissue and nerves and emotions, and we're gonna dig deep into that. But to kind of start us off,
little story sacks, essentially. You know?
That's right. We had originally, when we drew this, I had drawn like a forest because we're in the Pacific Northwest where we're presenting from today. But Frain said, make it a roller coaster, and maybe you just talk a little bit like why we want to talk about this as a roller coaster.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So I oftentimes when I'm working with people on stories, I do start with the roller coaster metaphor because the beginning of a story, when you're telling a story, whether you're giving a presentation or you're speaking at an event or whatever, there's that moment of anticipation on a roller coaster. You finally get in the car, you get locked in, and there's that little runway before the roller coaster starts off. And that's where you're building tension. That's you're getting used to being on the roller coaster. That's an audience getting used to your voice, hearing you talk, the way you talk, looking at you, and they're kind of taking you in before you sort of take them on the journey. And as Tim and I will discuss, there's many different ways. There's a general story structure we're going to dive into today, but then there's different ways to use that structure, and oftentimes it's shaped like different roller coasters. And like a roller coaster, that the two biggest things you want in a story are surprise. We didn't see that coming, like that turn you take on a roller coaster that makes you nearly lose your corn dog. And the other thing is reincorporation. You get used to, you are set up for it, and then you experience it again, and then another surprise. So yeah, that's why we use roller coaster, because it's so fun. It's such a fun structure, and it's such a fun way of building up the story to a climax and then going down, and it has different rhythms to it. It's very much what it's like to tell a story.
Awesome. And a quick little note on our own storytelling journeys. So I began as a fine artist, painter, It's not really important to what we're doing today, except that you'll see that I am creating visual notes in real time on the presentation that we're sharing. So that hopefully makes it fun and easy to see. Really, my professional storytelling and helping people tell better stories career started after a bit of a career in advertising, design, and creative direction. But in 2008, I joined EXLEARN, where I learned how to help people and organizations tell visual stories to make change happen. And so that's kind of like 2008 was my starting point for this type of like storytelling journey. Tell us a little bit about yours, Fran.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. I started out as a teenager doing improvisation and sketch comedy, which then led to more writing and like doing stuff on radios. And then I moved into, I learned about the Moth, and I learned about Porchlight in San Francisco, big storytelling series. And so around the same exact time as Tim, around that 2008 mark, I decided to start my own storytelling series and began the process of, taking the narrative that I'd learned from sketch comedy and through improv and applying it to directing and coaching people for stories on stage. And so that sort of began my journey into the deep, beautiful forests of storytelling.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much. So let's move up to our agenda. And I realize like there's multiple things on the screen, so it might be kind of small. At a very high level, we don't have to get into all the deep minutiae of what's about to happen because it's going to be amazing. But to kind of take us through at a very sort of high level, we're going to start with a story. I'm going to tell a story. It's a story that I made for people who are involved in the change industry to look at the way they do their work differently and tell better stories. So it's kind of meta. We're going to talk about connecting with the audience, both from sort of the nervous system and the internal organs. We're going to talk about the concept that story is change, that idea that the thing that's going to move the story along is that next surprise, that next transformation that we're trying to understand over the run of the story. As we get towards the later part of our discussion, we're going to get into narrative arcs, like what is the shape of the story as you think about our primary character's journey between good fortune and ill fortune. And then we're going to wrap up with some story framing. We're going to give y'all some tools that you can pretty much take tomorrow and say, I've got a presentation. How do I make it feel more like a story? And we've got some kind of nice recipes that you can use to start to make that work. So that was a really high level overview. Did I miss it? Oh, we're going to have a little QA at the end as well. That's right. Did I miss anything there, Frame?
I don't think so. I think I think we know our flight plan, if I may.
Yes. All right. Well, let's take off then and dig into a story about change. This is kind of fun because it's a story I wrote. You don't need any context. Let's just dive in.
Dive in.
For a caterpillar, life is simple and predictable. Eat as much as you can. And look at these caterpillars. They're gorging themselves. Then sleep until you're hungry again, which sounds pretty nice. Like that sounds like a good life. Eat, sleep, eat. But Kat, she longed for more. She wanted to meet new friends and to see the world with a different perspective. Some of you might think of this as like the I wish scenario. Oh, I'd love for this thing to happen. So it was time for a change. And that is exactly what she did. I did a little research on chrysalists, by the way, just to make sure this drawing was accurate. But this is like, and we have some fun comments already about, I love the moth. We've got moths, butterflies. We've got lots of cool things happening in the story as we go through it. All right. So upon changing herself, she saw things differently and wanted to share this change with her friends. So what did she do? She did what we all do. She gave a bad presentation to her friends about how to change. She wanted them to understand, like, this is what you do. And this is often where our storytelling starts, right? She probably used the company provided templates, but there she is. And let's see how this was received. So we have drool. Yeah, we have boring. We have like people checked out. If somebody's yelling boring while you're speaking, that's usually a pretty good indication that maybe your presentation isn't landing. So, longing to help her friends, she traveled far away to the island of unknown possibilities, where she met with the wise and magical unicorn modeled after my mother of astounding wisdom. And the unicorn told Katie, tell them a story and make them the heroes of that story. Then they will change. And that is exactly what she did. And very soon thereafter, oh no, I switched it to the wrong one. Man behind the curtain. Hold on, we're going back, circling back around.
That was a great teaser though for what's coming up. So.
That's right. Little sneak preview. All right. Very soon thereafter, everyone changed. And you can see now we've got little cocoons all over the tree, and with their newfound abilities, all of them could fly to new heights.
Aw.
And here is our happy final scene. And of course, any good story has to finish with the end. Okay.
Yes, the end.
So I wish I could throw confetti in this app. I can't, but there you go. There is our initial story about storytelling for storytellers.
That is right.
And so in moving us forward, I want to talk about how good storytelling is effective, because good storytelling will affect us. We probably should just put an S in there to make that the words agree, right? It's fun to do real-time editing.
Yes. We are essentially the unicorns in this story, aren't we, Tim?
We, to a certain extent, yes. We are the wise unicorns.
Land of possibilities today.
That's great. So when I talk about how stories affect us, I love the idea that stories tap into our nervous system, and as storytellers, we really need to help our audience and help ourselves get in a good mind state. So maybe, Fran, you can talk a little bit about understanding how we experience the world through our senses. And like the one kind of fun model I'll pull out here is the idea that the neural coupling model is a observed occurrence where a storyteller and a listener have neurons firing off in the same places, so that if you look at their brains, these things are being, it's stimulating the pleasure centers. You're getting cortisol, oxytocin, and dopamine. Those things are firing up. But part of the sort of value of putting your ideas in a good story, as opposed to a bulleted list of information, is that you're going to remember that story weeks, in some cases, maybe even months or years after that has happened. And so this is why the storytelling is so important, that it kind of helps us dig into what we're doing. So one thing that good storytellers do is target the senses.
Yeah. We like to say that, there are things you can do to target the senses right away. Like if you're talking about the comedy world, you've heard of the term lowbrow humor, and there's things that you can make people have a belly laugh, right? That's one form of laughter. It's kind of the easiest place to hit people. But then if you have laughter that rises up out of the story, that will hit a deeper sensory system in the audience than a belly laugh. That's where you start to get into creating a memorable experience for people. Like one way we'll talk, and Tim and I will talk about this, is reincorporation definitely creates an inside joke with the audience, and then they're invested in the story because you've set it up, then you bring it back, and then you bring it back again. And they are invested in that joke as you move it along because you've set it up for them. And what that does is it also taps into a very important part of your audience, which is their ego. And it quells that. It makes them feel smart. You've led them through the story, and they're going to become more relaxed in the story. Because one thing that is for sure is we are all animals. And so we can ignite fight, flight, or freeze in other people if we are not telling a story to people that they can invest in. If we feel like the speaker, you can be nervous on stage, that's fine. because in storytelling, people lean in, whereas opposed with stand-up, people lean back and are like, make me laugh. But with storytelling, people become invested in you as the speaker when you're leading them through like a caterpillar story, because that story lives, that kind of storytelling lives in our DNA. And so these become the components of storytelling, the logistics of storytelling become the thing that, like Tim was saying, make things memorable.
Absolutely. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Love that. And a couple of thoughts of like some of the things that we'll do about, like, I remember you taught me a term once, which was active synesthesia, which is essentially like helping our audience understand one sense through another. So, yeah. So if I talk about his velvet voice, right? Velvet is summoning to our minds the idea of something that's really plush, right? Something that's beautiful. You want to touch it. It's sensitive. And yet we can't touch through the screen. So we're doing this sort of like helping us understand, right? The leathery skin on the heel of her left foot. I really like this example that I pulled. There were strange, rare odors abroad of the sea smell and of weeds of damp, new plowed earth mingled with the heavy perfume of a field of white blossom somewhere near. I apologize for reading what's on the screen, but I kind of like the idea of helping everyone who may be partially paying attention just think about like how beautiful that word is. They've created this potpourri of senses in the way that they've put this together. And for our first little...
Yeah, and this is the kind of language that, you know, when you use sensory language, of when when I'm teaching personal storyteller or for speakers, we always run the story through the five senses. Like, what do things smell like? What do things feel like? What are the sounds? Like, if you're introducing a character in your story and you're like, he's the guy who was always blowing his nose. Then later on, when you're referring to this person, you're just like, the guy, the guy who was blowing his nose. Then they immediately have a picture and they remember everything else about that person. And you can apply that to objects too. If you're comparing your product to another product and you're saying like, that's the product that always has that crazy feedback sound, and you create this sensory version of it that hits people's nervous systems, they're going to remember that from it. And so that's a little bit of expansion on what we're talking about here. It's taking people into the scene of things. It creates these mini scenes in people's minds, a little movie.
Absolutely. And you've queued that up perfectly. Where we want to go next is, in the chat, describe some sensory details of a room you lived in as a child. And we have a worksheet that you can grab if you want to follow along with what we're doing. And my example in the worksheet was Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, and Noah the boa. Now, boa constrictors have an amazing ability to poop exactly in the corners of their enclosure, and the smell never fully dissipates. That was my room. That was one of my bedrooms as a child. So please, in the chat, like, add a little bit of a sensory story of a room that you were in at some point. Help bring us there. Show us what that's like. And you can scroll down to the bottom to grab the worksheets, or if you just want to join in the chat, you're welcome to do it.
Put it in the chat,
Yeah.
That's where it's at. It's in the chat. Take some soak time and add it in the chat.
And I'll put mine in. Let's see. I'm not sure if I can actually participate in chat, but that's okay. We're cool.
We're cool.
We're cooler than chat.
Yeah.
All right. We'll give people a second to add some thoughts. Oh, and there's the direct loop to the worksheet. Awesome.
Yep.
And then we'll give people a second. We'll move on, and as we see things maybe happening in the chat, we'll go back to it and we'll keep the story moving.
And I'll add one in, which is at one point I was a campfire girl, and I had this giant desk, and in my desk drawer I had I stored all my mints for sale. So my room at one point just was permeated with the smell of Campfire Girl mint cookies, and it was pretty awesome, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like Megan's
boxes of my own mints because they were there and they were taunting me and they were smelling delicious, and so
Yeah, I like Jeremy's creaky wooden floor, labels on the furniture to teach me reading.
Oh, that's so sweet. A pink
Oh, this is
baby
great.
birthday cake exploded in the room. Oh my gosh.
Lime green walls that were so bright they made people in the room look sickly because it reflected on their skin.
Oh, so everybody had hepatitis in your childhood bedroom then. That's wonderful.
That's
Rough
great.
wooden octagon table with a Commodore 64. Oh, wow.
So good.
The smell of crayons in the desk drawer. Yes, that was mingling with my Girl Scout cookie mints, by the way, things like crayons and also markers that had really strong smells. Twin beds in a shared room with my sister, lots of stuffed animals and books. Yeah, that's really visual. That's like sets a scene right there so perfectly, you know?
Yeah. Windows so big the stars would illuminate my room at night. It's so great.
I feel like the caterpillar was in your room also. Like that seems like part of her journey story there. 3 twin beds I shared with my younger sisters for a while. We had those glow in the dark. Oh, I love those glow in the dark stars on the ceiling.
Great. It's so great.
These are so great, so visceral, and you can see from reading these, like, we laugh and we just get such a picture of it, and it ignites like all the things that Tim and I were just talking about. It ignites all these sensory, it fires things off right away and makes people lean in because it has a personal element to it as well. And, you know, even in product talks or when we're talking about user experiences or whatever we're talking about, we want to bring those visceral details in from user experiences. If you can get those visceral details from users, those are so great. And like you were talking about, I love the unhappy path. And if you can get visceral details from the people who are unhappy and happy and marry those together, you're firing so many synapses off in people. And it also, those specific details, you know, we like to say God is in the details. That's I did not make that up. That's Plato or somebody who's, you know, ancient said that. And the more specific you get, the more picture you paint. And so these are beautiful. These are like perfect for what we're talking about.
Yeah. And I love the other thing I think that does is that it helps people understand that, hey, I didn't have ChatGPT write this. Like the one thing it can't do is know what the smell of your childhood room was like. So it also personalizes it in an important way. In the details, I'm just going to say deets. And so where we're going next is by understanding how humans work and relating to them and sharing some of these like vulnerabilities about ourselves, it can be really, really helpful. And as Frain had mentioned a little bit earlier, right? Like as we are connecting with people, we're trying to sort of create these belly laughs, these really deep experiences. And one thing that you'd mentioned at one point a little while back when we were talking about storytelling was that, like, when an actor is trying to make a connection, or a performer, an improv performer, they make it look so easy, but what they're doing is so hard.
Yeah. And I just want to point out it's hard, but it's also learnable. And I think that sometimes for people maybe who are a little bit more introverted or quiet, I find that when I'm working with people, they can get caught in a trap oh, some people are just naturally more entertaining or louder or whatever, which is, you know, somewhat true. But the thing is that a lot of what we're talking about is very learnable. And a lot of times people who are more comfortable they were raised in a family where there was a lot of storytelling, or they did acting, or they have a background in things. And the stories of introverts and quieter people are just as valuable and equally as valuable as any other story. And so these concepts are for everyone. And so this is just an illustrative concept I'm going to talk about. You can see on Tim's image there's a violin. And so here's our little scenario. We have 2 violinists on stage. They both learned the same piece by Chopin. Please tell me there's a violin solo in Chopin. And one of them has really learned it letter perfect. They have memorized it and they know it note by note by note. And they are on stage and they are performing it perfectly. The other person also knows the piece, but they're so passionate about it. And they have this passion that drives their piece, because they really know why they want to be a violinist and why they want to tell the story of this piece of music, to communicate it to the audience. And so they're so into it, they're sweating, their hair gets a little crazy, maybe one of their strings breaks, but they keep going, and they're so passionate about it and so passionate about communicating this piece of music to the audience. That's the person that we watch. We watch the person that maybe they're making mistakes, but they're okay on stage, and they know clearly, and we'll talk about this a few times during this presentation, they know why they are doing this piece of music for themselves. It's an internal thing that can be for your company, if you're, you know, promoting a product, or, you know, a software service or whatever, but you know why you're giving this talk. And more importantly, you know why the audience should care about this talk, because you are communicating a story to them. And like in movies and in books and in stories, it's like the most common thing that writers talk about, that people forget, the little secret recipe that people, because we can get wrapped up in just like memorizing the talk and getting it done and getting it note perfect, rather than like, hey, what's the story I want to tell here? And I have a really great example. I have this friend who's a Shakespearean actor, and he would always learn the story of that Shakespeare story, the story of his monologues, just in plain, you know, regular everyday English. And then he knew what he was saying, and he was amazing on stage because he was speaking Shakespearean language, but it just resonated with you because he clearly knew what he was trying to impart. And that's the story of what you're doing is so much more important than getting word perfect, is how I'm going to wrap that up. And that it's just the most important part.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that the idea that you'd mentioned before, right? In so doing, we're connecting to the hearts, the muscles, the stomach, the nerves, like
Yep.
giving them chills, right? You care about somebody who cares. You are passionate with somebody who is passionate about something, and that really
Yes.
does like reflect in how the story is told, and as
Yeah.
we're trying to create these sort of butterflies, heart-wrenching scenarios, right? Gut punch. These are sort of the output of great stories, right? As we are connecting with the storytellers, we are simultaneously feeling these things.
Yeah, and I think
So
the thing about the violinist example is the string breaks, they're sweaty, whatever. And whatever happens in a presentation, whatever happens on stage, whatever happens online in a screen happens and the audience sees it. So you cannot deny it. So it's just like, if you're comfortable with mistakes, you know, if you're comfortable with, you know, a question that comes up that's a little difficult and you're just like, oh, let me think about that, you know, it's just there. And you know, we call it surfing the audience. And you want it, as long as you're surfing the audience the whole time and you're there and you're present with the strings breaking, with the hair getting crazy, with the sweat, but you're engaged, the audience is going to be there with you. We are far more forgiving. And that also doesn't ignite that fight or flight thing, because as long as the person presenting is okay, then the other animals are okay too. So, and they see you as a leader, because you're like, your problems are like, mistakes are just like little things that arise. And sometimes they lead you to new places that are greater, because you just accept that. And you're like, oh, I misspoke that, but you know what? That actually brings up something for me, that let's talk about that. And yeah, just accept it all. It's all happening. We see it.
it's all happening. Yes. And so in sort of segueing to our next section, where I want us to surf to is the idea that story is change, or transformation. In the story that we shared before, there was a literal transformation of the main character from one state to another state. But as change leaders, we're always trying to think through, like, how are we going to help not set off that like fight, flight response with the people that we're talking to? How do we make them comfortable and understand that this change is going to work and happen? And so storytellers kind of know our brains are obsessed with change, right? That as humans, our face, we mentioned the senses before, is this change detection device that as we're scanning our environment, our senses are firing off, trying to help us see, like, is this something I need to run away from, or can I eat it? They're you know, you're constantly like understanding. I mean, we are animals. We're like our cats, right? It's like, I love you as long as there's food nearby. So as we experience like a stimulus, something happens, our face is going to immediately orient to understand like how do I respond to this? How should I take this new thing? What does this mean to me? And we also have this fear of change, right? That as we think about, like, and it's baked in, particularly when it comes to our work world, right? The fear lies in the fact that, like, the fear of change is always the fear of loss, right? If we think about, like, what is making this change scary, the thing that's making this change scary is that we don't know, like what this change might mean in our work lives. Does this mean I have to learn new processes? Does this mean that
there's risk, right? There's big risk.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's big risk. So it's the conundrum of being a human being, which is we want change, yet we fear change. And that's why we story tell, because that's exactly, we're talking about people who took the challenge of transformation, and we are magnetized to it because we're like, wait, I want to see how this person dealt with this in their business, or their life, or whatever, how they dealt with change. And it's like why we love makeover stories, because it's like we're attracted to that thing, like person. And in every makeover story, in every story of a product, there is always these moments of friction where you hear it all the time, where, like, you want to quit your entrepreneurship 30 times a day. You want to quit creating this new project 30 times a day. And that is exactly that human conundrum. And that is exactly how you build a story, is like, I want to quit. Wait, how did I get beyond it? I want to quit. Wait, like, there's an obstacle, challenge, we just build it from there. And it's just so compelling, like, wait, how did you get there? How did you do that?
Yes. How do you get over this and through that and eventually where you're trying to get to? I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And authors, we mentioned Shakespeare earlier, are very good at creating moments of unexpected change to start a story. So as we think about, like, starting stories, first off, how do most of us start stories when it comes to our sort of business storytelling world that we live in? And I know how they start. You don't have to tell me. There is a slide in the beginning of every PowerPoint that says, this presentation was created by this person for this audience at this time. That's the first thing that we experience. So part of why Frayne and I waited a minute on introducing our agenda and had a little fun first was that we wanted to begin with some more fun questions and talking about the sort of journey before we got into some of the protocol that needs to happen that's a part of any good presentation.
It's a teaser. It's a teaser, common terminology. Yes. It's a teaser, get you excited into it.
Right. It's the grisly murder right before the dong dong in the, like, this, the show I'm talking about, dong dong da 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 da, Law and Order.
Yes, I was waiting
you,
for you to say it. You got it.
But here's some examples of authors, like, bringing things to good starts. So
yes,
we have here, like, the three examples I think are pretty fun. I think they're pretty visible in the window. I think that they're pretty legible. So I'm not going to read each of them, but I do like the concept, right? The amber light came on is fun because now what's next? What does that mean, right? According to my journal in 1984, I was best friends with Madonna. So great. Thanks for back.
I love the chun of justice. That's very funny. Yeah, and the thing about all of these things, let's reiterate, is they all have some sort of sensory in them. The amber light came on is visual. It puts us in a place. And the reason why we talk about these visual details is to put people in place, which we often don't do in presentations, is like they're just happening in a vacuum somewhere. Whereas if you put them in a place, you create a container for your story, for your presentation, for your interview, or whatever you're doing. Once you put people in a place, that's another very human thing. We like to feel supported inside containers, So, yeah.
And as a like, we'll kind of jump to our next assignment because I want to make sure we've got time to go through all of this.
Yes.
And I've got a very cool little audio snippet to share. So I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to share it.
Yeah, and it's from a storyteller from one of my live backfence storytelling shows. And I'll talk a little bit more about Robert after Tim plays this. This is the opening of his story, and you will see how this draws you into the story right away. It's recorded
Absolutely.
live, so it's a little rough. It's a little bit of a rough audio, FYIs.
Yeah. Here we go. And we're going.
I'm from Japan, where more than anywhere else in the world, people actually die from overwork. So many die, there's a word for it, karoshi, which means hard work, death. And results from mixing long office hours and physical inactivity. My wife, Daniela, is from Rio de Janeiro, where more than anywhere else in the world, people actually die from overpartying. So many die, there's a word for it. Carnival.
So marvelous.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's such a great start because number one, he does the thing where he teases you into the story. And then number two, he creates what's something we're going to talk about a lot in storytelling, which is contrast from beginning to end, from detail to detail. We want contrast. That's the number one symbol of transformation, right? So he sets up right away this story that I'm sure you can guess is about him. The story becomes him meeting their family and him having to deal with this contrast and this culture clash. But it's like right from the beginning, in the world as it was, which we're going to talk about as the first part of storytelling, he sets up the perfect amount of details for you to know who these two main characters are in his story. Just, you know, from that, it's like, I'm a Mac and I'm a PC, right? It's just like, we right away, we just know that these two people come from two different worlds, and we get to find out, you know, how their stories are going to come together. And he turned it, by the way, this piece became so popular. He's actually touring a one-man show that is based off of that first initial story, which is really cool. He's gotten all kinds of grants, and it's really exciting. So storytelling, it's an awesome thing.
Absolutely. Love it. Love it.
Yeah.
So for our next assignment in the chat, we would love if you could write an introductory sentence or phrase that will set up a story for change and draw your readers in. That there's no way that Robert's story could not have some marvelous changes that are about to happen, or some explanation based on what we now know. We care, and this is fun, and we are invested in his story. So
yeah, and it sets
we'll
up a question. Yeah, it's like the best openings in the world as it was set up a bait question, because now the bait question there is like, oh my God, how are these two people going to come together with these two cultures, and are they, you know, what's going to happen with them? You know, we lean in and we want to know what comes next.
Totally.
Okay.
So we'll give people a minute to add some ideas here. So in the chat, yes, write an intro sentence or phrase that will set up the story for change and draw your readers in. So give everybody just a sec.
And the more specific your details can be, like, think about how specific his details were. Think about like, even take the sensory details you had in your room. Like, you know, you've got a Commodore in the room and a Commodore in my room, and this person that I really like, you know, person X, who I, you know, didn't seem to like anything that had to do with gaming, was coming over, and I worried about how they were going to judge me, you know, like, the more specific you can get. It all started with a scoop of ice cream.
Yeah. And Fran, you had a really nice start to a story that you told in a workshop that we were a part of not too long ago. It was the story about the kind of, you began with a pretty single line about the relationship with your father, and I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. What was that? I've told that story in different ways since then. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. So I would say it was certainly, it was almost like a quick vignette about the relationship that you had with him, and how, while it was strained at times, this was his love language. I think that was how you described it. Yeah.
Numbers were his love language, but one of them that I've used with stories with him before is, he was the kind of dad who, if he knew I was doing swim, he's the kind of dad who picked me up from swim practice every once in a while. You know what I mean? Like, it was just
so good.
You can
Yes.
know right away that
Yes.
we weren't a super close relationship. But he's also the kind of dad who taught me how to make a martini when I was 12, and I would make one for him when he came home from work, which is highly inappropriate, but also the way that we connected. So,
Love
yeah.
it. Love it. One
Yes, look
evening
for the
alone
box.
custodian.
Oh, we're both reading at the same time. Sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. Oh, I'll go first. One evening, a lone custodian with his mop followed me through the galleries of Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History.
Ooh,
Ooh. I love it.
I love
What
it.
will happen next?
Yeah. We all knew what the glowing lines of data in the Excel meant, but no one wanted to speak the truth into the heavy air of the room. Chun chun.
Yes. 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 We get our chung chung. Yeah, no, that definitely like sets us up for, and it's funny because people say like, well, all I have is data. How do I make that feel dramatic?
Yep.
We just solved
And
it.
listen, yeah, and the heavy air of the room means there's some kind of conflict going on. There's kind of probably some oppressive, like people aren't really sharing their thoughts. People are holding back. The heavy air is such a great, potent, visceral term. And I love, just look in the box was the last thing I heard. Last thing. So something in the box made this person pass out and fall to the ground, or be taken away, or kidnapped, or something, or aliens rose. There's so many things. It's like, what comes next in that story? Automatically, these all set up a question for what will happen next in this story. And that it's always compelling. We are just drawn to that as people of, what's that sound? Like that's that thing of like, what is that? We have to investigate what that sound is,
Totally. And I like that there are some examples that have good specifics, but some that are vague, but they all point to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
That like you can be appropriately vague to draw people in. Like that can also be a storytelling technique. Sometimes the couple of specifics are great. So I like all of those are really fun. In response to that final challenge, Ramsey said, "Hold my beer and watch this." That's great. That's great.
Clearly, that's a
fun.
epic trick, by the way.
Yes. So sliding us forward, we're going to pivot from how we begin to the shape of the story as we get into it. Frayne had mentioned earlier a little bit of these, like the roller coaster concept of going through stories. And so the next couple things we're going to do is talk about 5 core elements of story that we think are pretty critical for just being able to like put your ideas together. So starting out, we talk about setting, right? And mine began with the caterpillars in the tree, but the point here is we want to establish the world as it is. Anything to add to that, Frayne? You had kind of mentioned like, here's what you describe.
Yeah, it's the world as it is or the world as it was at the beginning of the story. Either way you want to look at that. And we, in Robert's story, he set up so much information in those first couple of sentences. And that's, the world as it was, this opening part of the story is you're setting up just the details that you need and nothing more to prepare people for the main characters of your story. When I say main characters, that means anything, the main thrust of your story in any sort of way. And you're also setting up either there or the next thing we're going to reach, which is the catalyst, either there in the catalyst, kind of a bait question, like that will, set up the story. Like I said, with Robert's piece of audio, it's like, clearly we want to know what's going to happen with this culture clash. Like what will happen to these two people? How will they each deal with each other's cultures and each other's families as they come together? And there's this show on Netflix now that's become huge, which is called Nobody Wants This, which is a culture clash show. And they do a good job. This whole story structure we're talking about right now is like the world building right at the beginning. They set up just what you need and nothing more really rapidly in that show. And you see it all the time in pilot episodes that are done well. they set up this stuff. Really, it's just like 10 to 15% of your story is the world, or your speech or your talk is this part of that, is just about that amount.
Yep. I drew the Jeep because Jeep is just enough essential parts. At least somebody told me that. I don't know if that's actually what it meant, but I like the idea that it's like, just put the things that it needs to drive and get it on the road.
That's funny. I only know Fiat, which is fix it again, Tony.
Great.
I've never heard the Jeep one before. That's funny.
So now we have the catalyst, the spark that drives the action, right? Now we have the thing that's going to kick off the action of our story. You know, I'd put that like, hey, she spun a cocoon. But one of the ways that you can think about phrasing this is, this happened. A single sentence that creates a shift in the action of the story. And we'll keep like digging through these frames so we can kind of get to our next our other activities.
Let's do it.
So now, yeah. So now we're getting into the body of the story. We've kicked off the action. The action is moving towards something. And I like the way, maybe you can talk just a little bit about like raising the stakes. Like, how do we infuse, you know, like build some dramatic intrigue here?
That's kind of the thing we were talking about, where the raising the stakes part of the story is, what are the obstacles that you run into, as whatever the question is, the quest that you went on at the beginning is, what are the obstacles that arise to you getting what you want, which is what you're trying to get to the climax of the story. So you run into those things, you solve it, you run into another thing, because stories are, in essence, in the very, very bones of what they are, they're raising questions and answering them. So they're all about choices that were made, right? And that's why in personal storytelling in particular, it's about failure, because you make a lot of choices that don't work out, or they take you to new places, unexpected places. And that's what we talk about when we talk about raising the stakes, like how it's that change journey we talked about at the beginning, the conflict between wanting to change and then fearing change, because you're always going to end up in, you know, like at the edge of a cliff or in a dark spot, and you're like, do I retreat or do I move forward? And how do I move forward? And that's the constant question we have in our life. We wake up sometimes, we don't want to move forward, but we find a way to move forward to our job or to the next task or whatever it is that we have to do, especially if it's something that does create change or cause change. And the other thing that Tim has written down here, which is planting seeds. Planting seeds starts in the world as it was and moves about halfway through the body of your story. And what planting seeds are is anything that you're going to reincorporate that we talked about, like the satisfaction of reincorporation. You want to plant the seeds for reincorporation, because the second half of your story is basically reincorporating all the things you set up in the first part. You know, so obviously in Robert's story, he's going to reincorporate this work-death aspect and this partying aspect that he's already set up, and anything else he's set up. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the end. We're going to talk about reverse engineering and contrast, kind of, but we'll move through this. That's the idea of planting the seeds there.
Absolutely, yes. And part of one of the things that you probably didn't catch in my little story, but I was trying to show that like the leaves were falling off the tree to try to show that like, hey, maybe the caterpillars need to get going with their transformation plan here. Like there are some headwinds, there's some challenges that they're going to be facing as they move into that. So we get to our climax, the turning point, the big battle. This is answering the question that we set up with the catalyst. As we spark off in this direction, now we have arrived there.
Right.
And so yeah, and in this case, right, like I have two stories going on at the same time, which is probably like maybe overkill, but you know what, I really like drawing. So here but that idea that this is when you're seizing the chalice, slaying the dragon. In this case, the sort of like climactic moment was an interesting one, because it was when the unicorn told the butterfly, this is the key, that here is your unlock for your quest. Here is the thing that you need, that you've been seeking. And so it's kind of that moment of like, all right, this is the thing you need. Then we get into my favorite French word, denouement. I even spelled it correctly. It has that E in there. I don't know why that's there, but it is.
French.
So it's French. That's why it's there. And this is really the lesson, right? The world as it now is, this is like the takeaway or the call to action. Anything to add here as we kind of wrap up?
No, but I want to just reiterate one more thing about, that that your catalyst and your turning point really need to talk to each other. For instance, in Robert's story, it was his catalyst for the story was that he was going to meet her parents. They were coming to town. And so then the turning point was he did something and he was afraid that they weren't going to like him because they kind of made fun of him a lot and it was really hard for him. And then he finally won them over in the turning point, right? And so then the world now is that he could have some more sense of humor about himself and they had more sense of humor about themselves. And then that was kind of the new world. And it created a lot more unity in their marriage when they kind of got through this story together. In a business story, and this is like where we talk about reverse engineering. If Robert knows that's where his story ends, then he's going to go as far away from that as he can in the beginning, right? And that creates that contrast. And reverse engineering stories, and the two questions that I don't care what kind of story it is, you need to know, or those stories we talked about, is why am I telling this story, and why does it matter to the audience? Those questions are so important, and again, forgotten often. Even when big movies get made, sometimes it's like, why did you make this movie? It seems the tail can wag the dog so quickly in stories when we don't have some of these basic questions answered. And that's where you can start forming your story. And then by answering those questions and by reverse engineering, guess what? It's an automatic way for you to learn your presentation. And it's not just about memorizing cards. It's about really knowing that story, really knowing that Shakespeare model. I was the example earlier, just knowing it in your body. And it's so much easier, to do it that way and ingrained.
100%. 100%. And as we kind of look about like mapping these elements on the story, it's fun how nicely they fit. So this comes from the German playwright Freytag. Some people call this Freytag's pyramid, but it maps the action of the story as you think of it, kind of like beginning with exposition. This is the like world as it was. Then we have the inciting incident that kicks off rising action, which leads us to our climactic moment. And then there's the falling action, and then the denouement or lesson. Like all of those steps can be mapped in this way if you think about like the going from left to right. So as we start to think about our roller coaster metaphor, right? Good stories will have some interesting roller coasters as you walk through them. Otherwise, I think we've also heard of like, maybe this story is flatlining. If a story is flatlining, it's partly because we haven't set up any action. If all you're doing is reporting out information, then still you need to set up that information, give people the context for the information that you're reporting out, help them understand the importance of that so that they care. And that even the most simple report out of like, here are our learnings from this activity can be framed in a story to make it feel and have more impact. So as we kind of like move this concept forward, Kurt Vonnegut, the author, has some great work on the idea of story arcs can also be mapped as our primary characters' interplay between good and ill fortune. So Frayne, just very high level, outline the bullet points of the Cinderella story for me. Where do things start? How is our main character?
It's a rags to riches story, right?
Pretty much. She kind of starts low, right? And then what's one of the sort of first inciting incidents here that kicks off the action?
I think that the inciting incident is that that something happens that can change their fortune.
Yes.
They get a glass slipper, for instance.
Yeah.
And,
dances with the prince, leaves the slipper on the steps.
Yep.
And then and then she goes home. But that was sort of like, that was like our first big inciting action. She goes home and gets put in a dungeon because they're like looking for the girl with the glass slipper. So it's not so good. But then at the end, it's a Disney movie, or at least the one that I'm familiar with. I'm sure there are probably like some.
One does not work out the same way, but
Grimm Brothers always end with a downward slope, whereas Disney shows are always going to end moving up and to the right.
Yeah, they're always going to have that. Yeah. And then just like to reiterate some things too, there's like a lot of contrast at the beginning. Like, you know, Cinderella's a big dreamer and everybody's like, you know, knock it off, you know, stop dreaming, you know, this is where you are and this is where you're going to stay. And something happens that takes her out of that world. You know, there's a lot of like, when you watch like athletes' stories, there's a lot of times where nobody believed in them in the beginning. And then there's this thing that happens, you know, where they dance with a prince in the world of sports, you know, and then maybe, you know, they go back home and everybody's like, no, you can't have this thing. And then they meet the right person or the right circumstances arise for them to have their, and it's often in sports, it's called, a lot of times people will say the Cinderella story of person X. It's
That's
often,
right.
You know, so yeah.
That's right. You always hear that, like, oh yeah, this is a total Cinderella story.
Yeah. It's weird how it's such common nomenclature. The Cinderella story is very funny, you know?
Yes. And then the contrast to the rags to riches framework, there's the Schitt's Creek framework, which is starting high, riches to rags, right? So that sort of goes, and the hilarity ensues in that contrast, right? We love this story because you're going from here to there. How are our characters going to deal with there? Because that's not what they're accustomed to.
And you can also think of that as the fall from grace story, which happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we love in America, we love people to raise really high, fall from grace, and then build their way back. You know what I mean? Like, I think that Anne Hathaway has that story, frankly. She was like, just like for a while, and then she came back into favor. There's lots of people who have that story, you know, so.
Nick Cage, I think, has had multiple, like,
yes.
Nick Cage his career has been up and down in marvelous ways.
But then Jeff Goldblum never goes away. He's eternally in grace.
always beloved. Yeah,
always
interesting
beloved.
How that works.
Yeah.
But I think that as we're thinking about these kind of how these storytelling elements affect the work that we do, right? Sometimes we there's also like the hero in a whole story. Pixar had Soul come out a year or two ago. It's probably like 5 years ago, but it feels like it was recently. Trading Places, yes.
Yes, perfect.
I love that there's some other, yes. So that idea that in Trading Places we have a fun pattern going because we have our main characters doing this to a certain extent, right? That we're both having a rags to riches and a riches to rags experience simultaneously, where we're elevating one and putting the other one down. And so I think that's fun to think about that. So one little prompt.
There's
go
also,
ahead.
Really quickly, there's also a transfer story, right? Book of Mormon is a transfer story where two people transfer positions, and that's the Trading Places story.
Yes.
What you're just saying, but I just wanted to say that's called a transfer story, which is also a really great storytelling technique.
Absolutely. And I think that as you think about your next like business presentation, you may not necessarily be thinking like, well, what is the arc of this presentation? But at the same time, thinking through the presentation that you have to give in story terms can really help it improve. And that having some like concrete examples of, you know, here's a case study. Don't let it be a case study. Let it be a case story. Like tell the story of how this thing happened, as opposed to just like, here's the thing we made and here's how people liked it. Like be more, you know.
So there's a book called Story that's a really great book by Robert McKee, and a lot of screenwriters use it. Anybody who's writing story uses it. And one of his main points is that like in any presentation, any story that you're telling, you have like vertical moments, which are just the facts, right? These things happen. You know, I went to Paris, you know, I went to the Eiffel Tower. And then what makes it a story is reflection, right? So that's what makes it a story. That's what, those reflections are those little visceral details that you offered up in like what does my first room look like? And what first, it's like, I went to Paris and, you know, what did it mean to me? What did it mean to my business? What did it mean to us when this thing happened? And you always want to go bullet point reflection, and that automatically starts giving you those details for story. So
absolutely. And that's if you listen to almost every This American Life piece, there is that sort of, here is, they will go between the storytelling and the reflection in very, you know, like it's so seamless. You almost don't even notice that that's what's happening.
Yeah. And so I can do the format for working with This American Life is in the context that we're talking about is not an image we have here, but like on the left hand. So if on a vertical piece of paper, on the left hand side, they write all the factual things that happen of the story. And then on the right hand side are all the reflections on each one of those things. They write like the obstacle, and then what I thought about the obstacle, how I overcame the obstacle, this fact, and they split it like that. And then when we're talking about planting seeds, anything that they fold that piece of paper in half, and anything that is not planted in the second half, they go back and they go, oh, we need to plant a seed for this in the first half. Because that roller coaster is that tick, 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 tip, up, 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 up. And that's all you planting seeds there, right? And now we want the story to take off. And so if the seeds are planted and people know like, oh, there's that guy who always, did I say a sneeze or a cough? I can't remember. But anyways, there's that person detail for them. And then in the second half, you get to use just shorthand for the things. If, for instance, like your whole story centers around something, a rabbit, something happening with a rabbit in the second half of your story, and you never introduce the rabbit, then the second half of your story gets weighted down by this big detail where you have to go like, the rabbit looked like this and acted like this. And then everybody's like, ugh, because we want the story to rise. We want it to climb like the roller coaster and be full of surprises. And like, Ira Glass talks about, the most important part of your story is your ending. If you start great and you end with those weighty, the whole explanation of the bunny at the end, that's not good. If you start, it's okay, like I said, to be a little nervous in the beginning or whatever, because you know your story and you're still imparting it and you still know why you're telling it. And you get to the end and you've done that really good job of reverse engineering it. Then you get to leave people with this great moment. And then you just lead right into whatever your call to action is. And people are like, I'm ready for it. I want it. And, they felt like a part of the story the whole way through.
Absolutely. That was a fun sidetrack on the This American Life like framework for how they do it, because I think that really can help too. We don't often think of putting our own like I've got a presentation to give. What are the facts and what are the reflections that we need to understand about it? That's a really great tool, and we should make something for that.
It's a great way to bring in user experiences to things too, is to think about like, we had this problem and do we have a user experience that kind of reflects on that,
Totally. Yeah. So this is like a little activity that we don't necessarily have a place to share. So I apologize for that, but just grab a receipt that's next to your desk and think about like map the arc of a favorite story. Like think through that as we dig into where we're going, and think about what like books, movies, even like podcasts have story, right? That it's interesting that I remember speaking early on when I was doing a design podcast, that a radio broadcaster came to me and he said, here's something that's really important for you to remember. You are not just interviewing a person. You are creating a character as the host of this podcast. And people who have done this successfully have built a persona that is what draws people to the content. It's not just the fact that you're asking somebody questions.
Which I thought was really, I like that a lot.
Really helpful. Cool. So the next tool that I want us to kind of dig into a little bit is the concept of story framing. And this is putting all of these elements together in almost like a Mad Lib kind of way that allows you to say like, oh, I've got something, I need it to put it together right away. I don't have the time to let it soak, as was mentioned before we went on. I don't have time to let this marinate deeply. I just need to get the ideas in a format that's going to feel a little more compelling. And with this, we're going to just introduce some prompts that are going to help you take your ideas and put them in an order that will make sense. Now, this is most valuable. There are other worksheets and tools that we've built for this kind of work. But the thing that I want the one caveat I will say is This is most valuable when you want to establish a value proposition of something. You're trying to say why this is important, or why you should buy our team's work, why you should work with us. So that's the one caveat as we kind of think about this. But you can apply these like a recipe. Like I sort of feel like this is a little bit of just like, here's the things you need to do to make this work. So first off, I realized that every movie trailer between about 2005 and 2015 started with the deep voice.
In a world.
But what is this accomplishing? It's just what we've spoken of. This is establishing the world as it was. Like the current state. This is the thing that you need to understand as we sort of talk about the world, in a world where this and this and this are true. The next one is you need. So as we talk about the things that you need, and I want to validate, like everyone can still see my screen, right? This is happening. Like we're still sharing, and you can see like looks like everything looks good. That would be pretty embarrassing if I was like talking about this stuff. All right, good. Thanks, Ramsey. Appreciate that, Goose. All right. So getting back to like, this is the thing based on that world that we've set up, and there should be like a little bit of like, here are some of the challenges associated with that current state. Here's the thing that's going to really help you as we want to move this forward. Like in a world where this and this and this is true, this is something that you need. The next thing is you can start to talk about yourself, because we've shown a little empathy. We've understood their world. We've talked about what they need. We can start to say, hey, we are this amazing group that does this cool thing. And we can help you we can provide you with these amazing tools. And the last part is the hardest one, making your future better by. The point here is, it's not that you just solve their problem. It's that the fact that you solve their problem gives them the ability to do more than they ever expected. and any note on this sort of like landing the story here, Fran?
I think that's great. I just think, you're thinking about what did we make, how do we make something easier? How do we make something clearer? Just think about like whatever that human emotion is that leads to your, like the call to action that you've got. Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to do something crazy. I'm going to call an audible, because I have a very cool example that this fits this just about perfectly. So I'm going to share another screen, and I'm going to allow my thing to share the window, and I'm going to share this window, and it's going to be clunky for just one moment, but I think it's going to work. All right, so let's try this one more time, because it wants to share. I'm getting like the full like reflection view of everything. So let's try this one more time. I'm going to go screen, and then I'm going to allow. Yes, this is like, this is happening in real time.
I know.
Okay.
I like it.
So I believe I'm now sharing by 2050, 10 billion people are going to be around, 70% of them living in cities. Can you see that? Oh, and I probably have to say share the screen before I actually make that real. Okay, so what am I doing here? I'm starting with the inner world, right? This is the value proposition, very simply. In a world where this is true, where we're going to have 10 billion people in all of these cities, and they're dealing with crumbling infrastructure and the effects of climate change and the strain that that's creating, there is a $1 trillion gap between the world we want to live in and the world as it is. So I've set up my case for change. I've set up this first sort of element.
And and of course our theme for this whole thing is lift people up. So far.
Yes, right. Yes, this is going to lift us up, right? So now we're going to talk a little bit, like focus in on like, and you as a development manager inside a city need to attract and retain the best people. Your architects, you need to train and manage them, but there's increasing time pressure, increasing complexity, increasing scale. Yes, we're raising the stakes here. You need to do more with less, and you need to have less impact on the environment as you do it. So, bearded man, what are you going to do? Who's with all of these demands? Well, guess what? We are the future of infrastructure, and with these amazing programs, we can actually help solve your engineering challenges, to allow you to approach your engineering challenges in a way that allows you to plan, design, build, and operate. This is an amazing solution that's going to help elevate your projects so that your stakeholders, your processes, and your insights can all be stored in the cloud. And this will lead to business growth, operational efficiency, risk reduction, and improved sustainability. And this is your future of architecture. It's not the stinky city with all of the pollution and the fading pipes, but a very beautiful looking world where you are more connected, more sustainable, and more resilient. So that is the there you have it. Like hopefully that gives you a little sense of like, this is just applying that recipe, right? Like it's not that many slides, and the illustrations are relatively simple. But the point that we want to make here is like, this is very much like taking those elements and putting them together in a way that makes sense. So I believe I'm back to sharing my other screen. That was a little bit of a sidetrack, but I think that you can kind of see that like the challenge there is to put all these elements together in a way that makes sense. So what I'm going to do is take us down to a little thing so you can see all of this on a single screen. And what I'm going to do is add the prompts in the chat, or I can't add them in the chat, but you can see them here. So the chat here is, in a world where this and this are true, you need these things. We are like, you know, this establishing our own credibility, and we can help provide you with these things to make your future better by. So what I'm going to do, Frain, is we can talk about this for a minute while people try to apply this recipe to talking about themselves, and we'll see if we can get some action here in the chat for this. Like, I think it would be fun to kind of see if we can get people to follow this recipe. But obviously, it'll take a minute. So so part of like where we can talk about as we think about this is like these elements. The other thing that's important about the elements that we just said, I'll keep that on screen so people can see it, is that these elements are really talking about the exact same thing that we did. World as it was. And then there's this need, this inciting incident that's going to spark off the action, right? And then you meet the challenge. We are this, so we're going to come in and help deliver on that question that we already asked. It's very simple and high level, but then we can help provide you to solve the problem, and your future is going to be better by doing these things. So it looks like Jamie Washington has a quick one. In a world where parts of your environment are critical to the story or serve as a tension point. Great. Yeah, no, that's perfect, right? We're definitely like getting to that point. You need, so then we're trying to get into the like all right, so what's next? I see what you're saying. Yeah, so we're adding, Jeremy's adding them to the chat for us. I really appreciate that. Or Jamie's adding them to the chat. Yeah, so now who are you? What does your organization need to do? All right, apologize. I was just like reading dumbly there. I was like, all right, good improv, Tim. Like think what you're reading before it comes out of your mouth. I think I'd be one of those anchors so you could like put like a recipe on if I were doing a newscast, and I would just read the recipe and then realize I just read a recipe. I'm not delivering the news. Living in the moment as we do this.
Yeah,
all right.
This is great. What does your audience need in order to help them solve the challenge above? Yep. And then making your future world better by, and that is sort of this the happy, like in marketing terms, they often say like it's not just the value, it's the value of the value, and the value of the value is literally like, you know, Procter & Gamble isn't selling products to clean your home. They're selling the 50s dream, right? They're selling the peace of mind that like you live in this environment that's better for your children, better for your family, that you are the ultimate. You're selling lifestyle and ego, right? Even in the example that you popped into, it's like you're selling a future that people want. You're appealing to a lifestyle that they want. You're appealing to the animal in them. You're going to have this nice container, this safe space to live in, you know. So
absolutely. And we have Jamie, thanks for stepping up. In a world where organizations struggle to retain top talent, we are a community of practitioners committed to building human-centered organizations. We provide tools, training, and experiences and community to make our world better by inspiring and equipping leaders for change. Hot dog. All right. Nice job.
Shameless
So-
plug from Ramsey. That's good. There you go.
That's great. That's great. So as we start to put all this together, taking all of the elements that we've gone through today and tying it together,
We've done a
hopefully
lot.
you could.
We've done a lot.
We've done a lot. We've been on a journey ourselves.
Yes.
and as we think about this sort of like storytelling for humans that hopefully kick ass, and we'll give people a few minutes as we do a little tying up as well. It looks like there might be a few more stories appearing in the chat, and I don't want to miss them. But thinking through how we make a human connection with the stories that we tell, and we're going to restate a lot of the things that we've spoken about up to this point. So here's sort of like a reframe of what we've just talked about. And Frayne, maybe we can like go back and forth on these 6 points. So I had put like good storytelling affects us when I think about that idea of making a sensory connection, trying to get into the internal organs of our audience. And then maybe you can talk a little bit more about like that connection.
And that's just like that, connecting with the audience is really answering those questions of like, why am I telling the story and why is it important to the audience? That's how you connect with them. That's the violin story. One person is just memorizing something, doesn't really know, why they're doing it other than like to get it right. And the other person is doing it not to get it right, but to get to the why of it, for themselves and for the audience. And that's how we impart things.
Absolutely. And then the concept that story is change, right? In order for our stories to have a heartbeat, it needs to move. There needs to be contrast between where it starts and where it goes, and from where it goes to where it ends. So we need to be able to trace the change journey throughout that. We touched on reverse engineering, but maybe remind people a little bit about what we mean when we say that.
Right. So we the fifth part of storytelling is the world as it is now. And if you know what that ending is, and you know where your story is driving to, then you start there and you go back and you think about what is the turning point that gets me to where that is, and then what is the catalyst that directly talks to that turning point, that asks a question that the turning point answers. And then before that, you're just like in the world as it is, as opposed to the world as it was. You think about what is just the essentials I need to set up in that first part of the world that were enough for people to know so they can follow the story and just nothing more. Because I will guarantee you that exposition is where people, it's very human to weight down exposition. So like, a story that isn't really a story, that's more anecdotal, is just an event that happens. A story is an event that happens, and when it's personal within the context of your life, when it's business within the context of your business. So you need to set up that world for them, because people who are outside your business don't know your business. So you'll have to let them know your business. And that's where those reflections come from.
Yeah. And then as we get into narrative arcs, the point here is that the story needs to have a flow and a direction, that we need to know that it's moving along, and that we are asking questions and that we're answering the questions as we move through. So the narrative arcs kind of help us put that together. And then that last idea of story framing, and I sort of put story framing in that in a world framework, but I think, Frayne, you also made the point of it needs a container.
Yeah. And the more you can put people in a place when you're telling a story, just think of place. How can you put them in a room, in an environment? Like I was working with somebody on their talk, and they are in the trucking industry. And so I said, what's the, like, who's an example that we can follow? And so we went to somebody's home, and we were talking about like them getting like fresh vegetables or whatever. So we had this home environment, which puts people in a house. And then we talked about delivering certain things to the person in this house. And then that way they could reincorporate like these oranges arrived rotten because, you know, this didn't, you know, this, and these arrived fresh. And then we have these little very human talking points to hang on to, that help us follow the story and help us see ourselves in the story, you know? So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was, hopefully I was trying to accomplish that as well with the idea of the caterpillar story, that the change people could see themselves as the butterfly, right? And that they were the hero of the story. And,
Right.
and that they're trying to tell these compelling stories to get people to change and to make great things happen.
Yeah.
So we made it. We are at our Q&A. And so we'd love to take a minute to answer some questions. If there are some questions in the chat, I did see that Lydia put another version of our story framework there. In a world where companies struggle with retaining their talent, you need a way to constantly refine your employee value proposition. So we are surveying all our employees on an annual basis and committing to meaningful action planning. We can help leaders know what matters most to their employees and provide them an action approach to improve on that feedback, which will make your teams retain and grow their talent. So nicely done. Once again, I wish I had the ability to throw confetti, but you know what? I can draw it. So let's do that. So we've got like the little thing.
You can draw some confetti.
Right? Like if you can't, there we go. There's confetti coming out of the thing.
There's some cat treats next to me. I could throw them in the air for everyone. But then I would wake up my cat, and I don't want to wake him up. So
yeah. But we'd love to take some questions if there are people that would like to that have questions on what we've presented thus far. And we'll give people a minute. Frame that it's interesting, the different groups that we've often helped people, you know, help tell stories for. We do this with Red Bull. They're one of the clients that I work with pretty regularly. And you talk about that idea of what are they actually selling? They are selling a lifestyle, right? They're a marketing organization that happens to sell energy drinks. But really what they're often doing is creating these events and experiences that are very much trying to, you know, the idea that they weave everything back into giving wings to people and ideas, right? That they're very good at delivering on that kind of promise for sure.
Yeah, it's all about energy. I mean, it's energy in a different way. Like they find energetic environments to like tell that story in, you know, whether, and it's risk, it's about risk taking too, right? You're a person who has energy. You're gonna drink in a, you know, drink this thing, and you're gonna be able to do all the things you want to take risks, you know, to a point.
Yeah. We have some great questions coming in. So the first was like, what tools and software are you using to illustrate these in real time? Very good question. I am using Adobe Illustrator. I was going to do like the Adobe logo, but let's just say Adobe Illustrator. And I have prepared these boards. I'm kind of punk, like I like to sort of push against the normal presentation styles and formats. So yeah, this is all in Adobe Illustrator, and I do have a Wacom tablet that I'm presenting from that allows me to draw right on the screen. So that was a great question, but probably a more important question. Maybe Frayne, you can take the next one. There is, what are some techniques to increase the appetite for leaders who are story averse or just want the facts?
So it's a challenge, first of all, of course, but I think that, you know, the thing is, like, for me, if I'm working with people like that, it's, you know, what do you want from like, again, it goes back to, why are you telling this presentation? If we're just doing facts, then just send people a deck. Like, there's no reason to be presenting it. It's like, but if you want people to be able to tell this story of what you're presenting, then you've got to have these storytelling terms. Otherwise, your presentation lives and dies in the room.
Yes.
Because they just walk away with nothing. You know, it's like, you know, Tim and I have worked on a million videos where we turn the facts into stories, you know, like there's got to, you know, again, even turning facts into tiny little stories makes them more impactful. So maybe with somebody like that, you can play around with, well, let's at least turn these facts into a story. And like at least the facts themselves can be presented as stories. But like, do you want people to walk away from this and be able to spread the word what feeling do you want them to walk away with? Like,
Yeah.
you know,
And if you have a relationship with the leader, you could almost call BS on them and say, hey, you know what? You say all you want are the facts, but we understand that you have 100 different audiences that you're thinking of when you're speaking.
Yeah.
And if it's the board, you need a story to tell them that, like, I am doing a good job stewarding this ship of the company. And
Right.
these facts are going to help tell the story that we are in good financial shape and that we
Yep.
have a vision for the future.
In other
That
words,
is,
it doesn't live and die in the room. They take it in and they're like, oh, it's like, you know, just show them episodes of Mad Men and how he changed their mind by telling them a story.
yes,
But
yeah.
But it just won't resonate with anybody. And I think they have a friction. I guarantee you that people who are just like just the facts have a fear about storytelling, because storytelling seems frightening, because it does hit the nervous system more. And so maybe just doing some light inquiry around, like, I know you say you just want, like Tim just said, I know you say you just want the facts, but like we really need to impact this audience and change their mind about this thing. And so can we let me just, and then trick them into it and start asking them questions. And the way to get people to do it is we naturally know storytelling language. And a lot of the way I change people's presentations is just asking questions and then saying like, oh, wow, see how you just said that? Like, that mattered to me, what you just said. Do you think you could say that? And get them to tell the story rather than saying, hey, you've got to tell a story. Just like ask them questions and lead them into it. Like Tim just had this great phrase, which is when you're interviewing people, make them the character, make them the main character, make them the main character in the story. We've got these facts. Now tell me why you think this fact is important. Like, why is this important to you? And they will likely tell you why it's important. And then if you point out to people, that's a story, they're like, oh, that's a story? Sometimes people think that story is way more elevated in the world than it is. It's like you're doing it all the time. So
Yeah.
show them that.
In fact,
and make sure you say like, oh my God, that was such a great story point. Anytime they're doing it, really emphasize with them when they spew out good story points so they can get used to that they are doing it naturally. It's super helpful.
100%. And even in the most basic format, right? If you are showing a chart that has the bar on the left and the bar on the right, there is a story in between why this one is larger than the other, right? This is a report, but this is tell us why, make us care about your damn chart, right? Don't just show the chart.
Because otherwise you end up in the world of, people making assumptive correlation causation things that aren't true. So you end up not really telling the truth about, like, facts are these hard things, but they can be interpreted in many ways. And what you want, you can tell your person is like, if you want this boardroom to not interpret these in some other way, because we are storytellers and people will interpret, you see it all the time in the world. It's like, you better tell them how you think these facts work for you, or else they're just going to run with them in some other way. And you can miscommunicate hugely, if I may use that word. You can miscommunicate a lot just because you think, oh, these are just the facts. And it's like, no. Because, the difference between, those two bars right there, we could all tell a different story about it.
For sure. So it's really about the interpretation of the data that's more critical than just showing it. There were a couple of questions about how do I keep a story alive and as it gets passed through an organization, or how do I remember those key points of a story, the key moments that would be woven into it. And it's not kind of the same answer there. I do think that when we can make our stories visual and memorable, when we can find the right images to be able to propel that story forward, Explain is really based on visual thinking. So a lot of the Explain Tier 1 work that I do is, in fact, I got home at 12 last night doing this for an organization, was helping them get clear on how they tell the story of where this organization's going, and having that vision, right? That if you have a visible version of that you can hand to the next person and say, here's the visual summary of the thing that we just learned. Like, hopefully this presentation has been a little bit of an example of that. If you want some of the specific story points that we've spoken about in this presentation, hit us up on LinkedIn, but also there is the worksheet that we added, so you can grab those there as well. Anything to add to that, Frame?
Yeah, just like, the visual and the visceral are what you're always, if you have those two things, those are very memorable. And just remember that there are phrases that are in our nomenclature that have been around forever, like a gut punch, moments of the heart, rash decisions. These are all things that are born of, because we, for all of history, we've been telling stories, and these phrases are there for a reason. And that goes all the way back to the very beginning of we are humans, and we do impact each other. And it's important to understand that we do that more than just through words. We do it through action, through visual things, through sensory. And all of these things, again, I'm just going to go back to, when your story is visceral and visual, it also makes you giving a presentation easier. You have these buddies, you have these collaborators, you have your senses, and you have your visuals. And they just act as this support system for you when you're speaking, and they just help impart your story, and they help you learn your story too. Because if you know your story, like an emotional arc or a visceral arc or a visual arc, then your audience members are also different from each other. Some people are visual learners. Some people like emotionality really strikes them more, and you're just going to include more people in your story by using these things. And like, if you're a person who's more introverted, then maybe focus on those visceral details, the visual details, and you can just do your story more simply, but you're still going to be impactful by heightening some of these other skills. And like a person who's naturally charming and entertaining, or we say naturally, but however they came about being that, they can rely on a different thing. But they're still, even if somebody tells a really charming story, but there's no visceral details in it, there's no conflict, there's no stakes, you're going to be like, I was entertained, but I still don't really know what that story was about. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
So,
yes. I think we've all experienced that too, right? It's
yeah.
like, okay, that movie was entertaining. I'm not sure what it was, but boy, there was a lot of style, not a lot of substance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's one more question in the chat that I wanted to get to before we kind of call it,
Yes.
which is a really interesting one. Data is an important proof point for making your case for the current state. How do you tailor your story for different stakeholders and personalities? So thinking disc profiles, different types of information that motivate different types of people to enlist them in your call to action. And I think that this is one that personally, Frame, whenever I begin doing this kind of storytelling work, I'm often thinking about like the key audiences that we need to motivate, and thinking through like, who are those key people that we need to connect with, and what are the steps that we need them to take. So as I think about those, it's a little bit of the white sheet of paper, but in this case,
Right.
Now we're thinking about like these specific actions that we want all of our audience to take as they engage with our story. What is this thing that we want them to do? And with that, it might be that one of our audience is that some of the tools that are going to resonate well with one audience are not going to resonate as well with the other. So you may need to tailor versions of your story for different audiences, and even think about, in some cases, the medium is the message, right? Like in some cases, an animation is going to help tell a story quite well, whereas in other cases, that's the worst way possible for them to understand the thing they need to do. This is something that needs to happen with a manager and their team working together closely. That has to happen sort of in an intimate space. So I think that we always try to map like the based on those results, we reverse engineer like for our audience. For this audience, we need this. For this audience, we need that. That's how I'd answer. What would you say?
Well, I think it just goes back to that question of why are we telling the story, and why is the story important to this audience? So
Yes.
you're always going to continually, with different audiences, you're going to answer that second question differently. The first question may remain the same in some ways, but how you're going to impart it, like, you know, you do the good work, the hoodoo of what Tim just talked about, but then you really think about, like, with this audience, you know, to reach them and to make this story important to them, maybe we need to change the setup in the world as it was, so that the details and the setup there are more pertinent to them. And it may still reach the same ending, but you're going to change the details throughout the story to suit that audience, and you're going to pull out the ones that don't suit that audience. And somebody just asked about aphantasia, and that's why I think, like I say, like, having your story firing on different levels, the visual, the emotional. Somebody with aphantasia might experience visceral details more. They might be heightened in that way. And knowing those story points and having those vertical moments, you allow a whole sea of different kinds of people in an audience to really be able to buy into your story. Where if you're just a facts person, somebody who's more visual isn't going to buy into it. But if it has those other elements applied to it, you're going to hit that nervous system of more people in the audience. You're going to, again, they're everybody, you know, at our basic level, we're animals, and we want to get as many of the zoo out there involved in the story as possible. And and it's something that people forget about too. Like, if it's like the Shakespearean example, like, somebody might not know Shakespearean language, but if that person knows the story and they're passionately imparting it and they know why they're telling it, you're going to address far more people in your audience and far more variety of people and get them excited about what you're doing.
Yep. We're being told we need to close, so we should probably wrap this up. We could keep going, but so final, like, our call to action is keep these 3 things in mind the next time you're going to start a story. So as you think about, first off, like, get off to a great start. Use some of those sensory details, like setting it up for change. The next is define your why, both for you, why are you telling this story, and for them, why should they appreciate this story. And the third one is think about the arc of the action of the story. Anything to add as we wrap it up, Frame?
I think we've said a lot. I mean, you know, pick and choose from here what you want to start with, what resonates with you. We've said a lot of stuff. We wouldn't expect anyone to incorporate it all in one day. But pick and choose, like, a couple of things that maybe seem, and use them for a while. Like, integrating new things means that you've got to use them for a while, whether you and see if when they work and when they don't for you. And that's it. But thanks a lot everyone for hanging in and listening to this. It's been a really great time flying this plane with you, Tim.
Thank you so much, co-pilot Frame. Back to you, Goose.
Thanks, y'all. And who would think that a couple storytellers would have a ton of words to share? That just blows my mind. That's crazy. So thank you all so much for being with us today. It was really an honor to have you. There's something Frame said earlier in the time, which is we want change, but we fear change, and that's why we tell stories. And I think right now, where our culture is, that's a really important thing to hold on to. I think as I'm in an organization and I'm watching other organizations we partner with pause and wait out of fear, out of not knowing, out of the ambiguity, and all of how that trickles down into everybody's lives. The ability to frame that as story as both kind of like a mental health and catharsis is really powerful.
Absolutely.
So really appreciate you all kind of delivering on that. So thank you all so much for being here. Y'all give it up for Frame and Tim.